The rain had started long before midnight, but by the time it rolled across the small town of Reno, it came down in hard silver sheets. The neon sign outside the diner sputtered against the storm, buzzing faintly, its red glow bleeding across the wet parking lot. Inside, the smell of burnt coffee and fried bacon clung to the air, mixing with the faint scent of cigarette smoke that lingered even though the "no smoking" signs had been nailed to the walls for years. Emily wiped down the counter for the third time that night, more out of habit than necessity. Her sneakers squeaked against the checkered linoleum floor as she moved from table to table, picking up empty ketchup bottles, straightening napkin dispensers. It wasn't busy, never was this late. The handful of truckers who had come in earlier were slumped over their plates, half asleep, half eating, their rough faces lit by the dull fluorescent lights above. Her body ached, but it wasn't just from the hours she'd spent on her feet. She was tired of everything, the long shifts, the bills piling up on her kitchen counter, the gnawing worry in her stomach every time she thought of her mother back at home. The medicine wasn't cheap, and the doctor had made it clear, her mother couldn't go without it. Emily pushed the thought aside as she refilled a coffee cup for one of the drivers, forcing a polite smile when he nodded in thanks. It was nearing midnight when the low, heavy rumble of an engine broke through the storm. Not just any engine, it was deeper, louder, the kind of sound that made glass in the windows tremble. The kind of sound that made people look up. Emily froze for half a second, rag still in hand, before the door creaked open and a gust of wet, cold air rushed in. He stepped inside, shaking the rain off his leather cut. The patches were unmistakable, stitched bold and unapologetic across his back, Hell's Angels. His presence seemed to fill the room, larger than life, the sort of presence that could silence a crowd without a word. Tattoos ran up his arms, dark ink against weathered skin, and his eyes, though calm, held the weight of long, hard miles on the road. The truckers at the counter stiffened, some lowering their eyes to their plates. Emily felt her throat go dry. She'd heard the stories, gangs, fights, dangerous men who lived by their own rules. But here he was, in her diner, dripping rain onto the tile floor, his boots leaving heavy prints with each step. He slid into a booth near the window, the neon glow painting his leather in a wash of red. Emily swallowed, trying to steady her nerves. It was her job to serve him, after all. She grabbed her notepad, forced her voice to come out steady, and walked over. "Coffee?" she asked, her tone quiet but clear. The biker glanced up at her, and to her surprise, there was no threat in his eyes. Just weariness, like the road itself had worn him down. His voice was low, gravelly. "Black, and whatever pie you got left." She nodded quickly, scribbled the order, and hurried back to the counter. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured the coffee, the pot rattling against the mug. She told herself not to stare, not to make assumptions. He was just another customer, she reminded herself. Just a man out in the rain. But as she slid the cup across the table and set the plate of pie before him, she couldn't help but notice how quietly he carried himself. No arrogance, no demands. Just a tired man drinking coffee in the middle of a storm, alone. Emily found herself wondering what roads had brought him here, and why men like him rode at hours when the rest of the world was asleep. The rain outside hadn't let up. Sheets of water lashed against the diner's windows, blurring the neon sign until it looked like a red smear in the glass. Inside, the hum of the refrigerator and the clink of silverware were the only sounds. Emily kept herself busy behind the counter, wiping already clean surfaces, stealing quick glances at the man in leather who sat alone by the window. He hadn't spoken much since his order. Just sipped his coffee slowly, like a man who had nowhere to be but everywhere to go. His heavy jacket steamed slightly as it dried in the warmth, the patches across his back catching the dim light whenever he shifted. Emily found herself both unsettled and oddly reassured by his presence. There was danger in him, yes, that much was undeniable, but there was also something else. Quiet, steady, she couldn't quite explain it, but it made her nerves settle. The bell above the door shattered that calm. It slammed open hard enough to rattle the frame, and two men staggered in, the stink of whiskey and rain clinging to them. They were loud, already laughing before they'd even reached a table, their voices filling the small diner like smoke. One of them wore a torn denim jacket, the other a trucker cap pulled low over greasy hair. Emily's stomach tightened. Drunks, and the mean kind. They ignored the truckers at the counter, stumbling straight toward her as she stood near the register. One of them leaned in close, his breath hot and foul with alcohol. "Well, "Ain't this a pretty little thing workin' the graveyard shift?" he slurred, grinning wide enough to show a row of yellowed teeth. The other snickered, glancing her up and down. "Bet you get real lonely out here at night, sweetheart. What do you say you keep us company, huh?" Emily's hand tightened around her rag. She tried to stay calm, tried to put distance between herself and them, but when she stepped back, they stepped closer. One of them knocked the tray from her hands, plates clattering to the floor, pie splattering across the tile. The noise made the truckers at the counter shift uncomfortably, but none of them spoke. Her chest squeezed with panic. She wanted to shout, but her voice stuck in her throat. And then the sound of leather creaked behind her. The biker rose from his booth with slow, deliberate weight. He didn't rush. He didn't need to. His presence alone changed the air in the room. His boots thudded against the floor as he stepped up behind the two men, towering over them like a storm cloud. She said no. His voice was deep, calm, but edged with steel. The drunk in the cap turned, blinking up at him, and laughed. "What's this? Big bad biker thinks he's the sheriff. Mind your business, old man." The other one shoved a finger against the biker's chest. "Yeah, why don't you sit back down before you get hurt?" The biker's lips curved into the faintest smirk. "That's not how this works." The next moment happened so fast Emily almost missed it. The drunk's hand barely rose before the biker's fist drove into his gut like a hammer. The man folded, gasping for air as he crumpled to the floor. His friend swore, swinging clumsily, but the biker caught his wrist, twisted, and sent him crashing against the counter. Plates rattled, a coffee cup toppled and shattered. The diner fell silent, the only sounds the rain outside and the wheezing of the two men on the ground. The truckers stared into their plates, pretending not to see, but their shoulders eased as if a weight had been lifted. The biker let go, letting the second man stumble back to his feet. "Take your friend," he said flatly. "Get out." They didn't argue. One dragged the other toward the door, cursing under his breath, before the storm swallowed them both. Emily stood frozen, her heart hammering in her chest. The rag trembled in her hands. She looked at the biker, who adjusted his jacket like nothing had happened, walked back to his booth, and sat down. He picked up his coffee, lifted it to his lips, and took a slow sip. No celebration, no boasting, just silence. When he finally set the cup down, his eyes met hers. For the first time that night, Emily felt safe.